The scorching winds of Xylos 3 tore at Lyra's tattered cloak, whipping her silver hair across a face streaked with grime and desperation. Her children, usually so vibrant, now clung to her legs, their small bodies trembling not just from the biting dust, but from the fear that radiated from their mother. Once, they had commanded fleets and councils, their lineage traced back to the very stars. Now, hunted across systems, they were refugees on a forgotten rock. The universe having decided that Lyra, once a revered matriarch, was its most hated alien mom. Lyra, an elf woman whose usual grace was now replaced by a haunted urgency, scanned the horizon with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. Her pointed ears, usually adorned with delicate, shimmering cuffs, were now bare and flattened against her skull, listening for any telltale hum of a distant patrol or the telltale cries of a star warg. Her twin dragons, Phelan and Zephyr, stirred restlessly beside her. Phelan, the larger of the two, a magnificent beast with scales the color of twilight and eyes like molten gold, let out a low rumble of discontent, his breath tasting of ash and ozone. Zephyr, smaller and more agile, with iridescent green scales that shifted like a chameleon's, coiled around Lyra's youngest child, Alara, offering a silent comfort. They were her last line of defense, her only remaining allies in a hostile galaxy. Their landing had been violent, the escape pod barely functional, scattering debris for miles. Xylos 3 was a backwater, a Class M world primarily known for its harsh, arid landscape and its sparse, primitive human settlements. Lyra had chosen it precisely for its insignificance, hoping to vanish into its desolate expanses. They had been on the run for cycles ever since the Galactic Council, swayed by the propaganda of a rival empire, had branded her a rogue leader, a danger to interstellar peace, and worse, a monstrous mother who had endangered her own children. The truth, of course, was far more complex, a web of political intrigue and desperate choices to protect her people. But truth rarely mattered in the face of a galaxy-wide smear campaign. Food was scarce. The local flora, what little there was largely inedible for her kind, and the small, scurrying creatures were too fast for even Zephyr to reliably hunt in their weakened state. Her children, Kylian and Soren, twins barely past their centennial growth spurt, huddled close to Alara, who was still an infant by elven standards. Their luminous skin had dulled, their normally keen elven senses dulled by hunger and fear. Lyra knew they couldn't last much longer. She had to find sustenance, and quickly, leaving Phelan and Zephyr to guard the children amongst the jagged rock formations that offered a modicum of shade. Lyra ventured out. Her movements were careful, silent, honed by centuries of avoiding detection. Her long, slender fingers, usually deft with ancient magic, now clutched a scavenged, crude metal rod, her only weapon against unknown threats. She moved towards what her scans, limited as they were, had identified as a small energy signature, likely a human settlement. The thought of interacting with humans filled her with a unique blend of dread and reluctant hope. Their species was young, brash, and often unpredictable, yet rumors persisted of their surprising acts of compassion in the face of overwhelming odds. Such stories were often dismissed as folklore among the elder races, but at this point, Lyra was desperate enough to cling to any thread of hope. The sun beat down relentlessly, baking the red earth and shimmering off the distant dunes. She topped a ridge, and there it was, a cluster of humble, low-slung buildings nestled in a small, surprisingly verdant valley, fed by a glimmering ribbon of water. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney, carrying the scent of cooked meat, a smell that made Lyra's stomach clench in a way it hadn't for decades. As she drew closer, she saw figures moving. Humans. A woman, her dark hair pulled back, was tending to some strange four-legged animals. Another figure, broad-shouldered, was mending a fence. They looked ordinary, unassuming, nothing like the heavily armed patrol ships that haunted her every waking moment. A small tremor of fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Lyra's resolve. What if they called the authorities? What if they were hostile? She was unarmed, weakened, and had 3 vulnerable children and 2 weary dragons depending on her. She had been branded a menace. Yet, the aroma of food, the sight of clean water, and the simple, undeniable need of her starving children drove her forward. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to appear as non-threatening as possible, even in her current state. As she stepped out from behind the last cluster of rocks, her silver hair catching the light, the woman by the animals looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. The broad-shouldered figure froze, dropping his tool. Lyra raised her empty hands slowly, a silent plea hanging in the hot, still air between them. Her fate, and that of her children, now rested in the hands of these unknown humans. The air crackled with a silence heavier than the dust Lyra had just traversed. The broad-shouldered man, the humble rancher, was the first to move. He was taller than many humans Lyra had observed, clad in practical faded denim, his face weathered by the harsh sun. He didn't rush for a weapon. Instead, he slowly placed the wire cutters he held onto the wooden post. His eyes, a startling clear blue, held no malice, only an intense, scrutinizing curiosity. The woman beside him, her expression a mask of guarded shock, gently moved behind him, her hand resting on his arm. "I won't hurt you." Lyra's voice was a dry, rasping whisper, the common tongue feeling foreign on her elven palate. "We mean no harm. We are lost and hungry." She kept her hands open, palms facing out, a gesture of absolute surrender recognized across millennia and galaxies. The rancher, whose name Lyra would later learn was Brooke, simply looked at her, then glanced past her shoulder toward the desolate ridge. He knew, instinctively, that a creature like her did not travel alone in a functional vessel. Her predicament had to be dire. He had seen strange things cross his land, the occasional downed satellite, military flares, and once, a shimmering, impossible shard of metal, but a sentient being. An alien mom with a look of starving nobility. Was new. Brooke stepped forward, reducing the distance between them. "Lost," he repeated, his voice low and steady, lacking the fear or awe she was used to eliciting. "Lost usually means trouble on Xylos. What are you running from?" Lyra hesitated. Truth was her greatest risk. To speak of the Galactic Council, the rival empire, and the manufactured charges of sedition would be to paint herself as a threat greater than a mere refugee. A misunderstanding. Powerful enemies who will stop at nothing to retrieve me. I need only safe harbor for a short while, until my dragons recover their strength. Food, water. The woman Kara finally spoke, her voice tight with concern. "Dragons? You brought children?" Lyra nodded, the exhaustion finally pulling at her rigid composure. 3, and yes, my pets. They are loyal, but weakened by the environment. They pose no threat to your livestock." Brooke looked down at the earth, kicking a small stone with the toe of his worn boot. His decision-making process was agonizingly slow to Lyra, whose mind worked at a speed honed by centuries of political maneuvering. Yet she recognized the gravity of his consideration. He wasn't debating fear. He was weighing risk versus humanity. He lifted his gaze back to hers. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the universe. And you call this place lost, which means you think we're unimportant. Maybe we are. But this is our home. We don't tolerate trouble." He gestured to the surrounding acreage, the fields of crops, the sturdy buildings. "My name is Brooke. That's Kara, my wife. We don't have much. But we have a dry barn, a well, and enough meat to feed my family." He paused, a challenging glint in his blue eyes. "I'll give you a deal. I'll give you shelter and provisions for 1 solar cycle. But you have to tell me the truth. You have to tell me why the universe is looking for you. And if I hear one rumor of your enemies disturbing my ranch, you leave. No exceptions. Do we have a deal, alien mom? Lyra felt a dizzying wave of relief wash over her, quickly followed by a sharp awareness of the danger. He demanded the truth, the very thing that made her a target. Yet, this simple human was offering the one thing her wealth and power could no longer buy: sanctuary. She looked past him at the warm glow emanating from the house window, imagining her children safe and fed. "We have a deal." "Brooke," she affirmed, the rasp leaving her voice, replaced by the resonant, ancient timbre of her race. "But I cannot bring my children to the house. They will draw too much attention. The barn will suffice, and the dragons must remain hidden. They are not pets, not entirely. They are a sign of my lineage and a sign of danger to those who hunt us." Brooke merely nodded, accepting the modification without question. He was already calculating the logistics, how to keep 5 alien beings and 2 mythical creatures a secret on their remote, but not entirely unvisited, property. "Show me where they are, Lyra. Kara, go prepare the smaller shed next to the main barn. And boil some water. We'll need a fire." As Lyra led the 2 humans back toward the ridge, Phelan and Zephyr sensed their approach and lifted their enormous heads. Brooke stopped dead in his tracks. The sight of the twilight-scaled beast and its green counterpart, even weakened, was terrifyingly majestic. He had expected oversized lizards. He had not expected beings of such raw, archaic power. "God above," Kara whispered, her hand clamping tight on Brooke's arm. Lyra looked at her pet guardians, then back at the rancher. "They are bound to me," she promised. "They will not harm anyone unless I am in danger." They reached the makeshift shelter. Kylian, Soren, and Alara were huddled together, their small faces drawn. The moment Kylian saw his mother, his eyes welled up, not with tears, but with a sudden, overwhelming sleepiness. Lyra rushed to them, but as she gathered him into her arms, she noticed a faint, unnatural metallic odor clinging to his clothing, an odor she recognized instantly from the violent escape pod landing. It was the residue of plasma disruptor coolant, a highly corrosive and slow-acting poison to the Elven system. He wasn't just hungry. He was slowly being poisoned. Lyra's heart seized, cold dread replacing the warmth of the rancher's offer. The shelter was a reprieve, but her son needed advanced medical intervention that this humble, simple planet could not possibly provide. Her reprieve had just turned into a ticking clock, and she needed a new plan immediately. If she revealed the poisoning, Brooke would panic and likely turn them away. But if she didn't, Kylian would perish within the cycle. She had to choose: trust the human with an impossible request, or watch her child die in the silence of their temporary haven. Lyra forced a reassuring, if thin, smile, pulling Kylian closer. The scent of the plasma coolant, faint but lethal, was a secret burden she could not yet share. She needed Brooke's trust completely before she could ask for the impossible. She handed Kylian to Soren, instructing the older twin to keep him quiet and close to Zephyr's heat. "Brooke," she said, her voice steady now, the aristocratic command tone returning despite her ragged appearance. "The barn is sufficient. We will need clean water for drinking, and a small quantity of high-protein, preserved rations if you have them. My children cannot process fresh meat easily." Brooke, still mesmerized by the sheer scale of Phelan, blinked and turned back to her, snapping out of his stupor. "Rations? Yeah, we've got some freeze-dried stuff. Hunting trips. Follow me." He led Lyra and Kara toward a large, sturdy structure set slightly apart from the house. It was a utilitarian space, smelling of hay, machine grease, and the comforting scent of simple hard work. Kara quickly pointed out a small, separate tack shed that was clean and dry-perfect for the children. Lyra went back to retrieve her family, the urgency of Kylian's poisoning a cold knot in her gut. She had to analyze the human's capabilities. This was a primitive world, yet humanity was known for its resilience and startling ingenuity. Could they possess the medical technology, even in a rudimentary form, to neutralize plasma corrosion? That evening, after the children were settled and had finally eaten, Lyra having coaxed Phelan to create a temporary thermal shield around the shed, Brooke brought her a thermos of hot herbal tea and a small lamp. Kara stayed behind, keeping a nervous but fascinated watch on the larger dragon. "We need to talk." "Lyra," Brooke said, sitting on an overturned bucket, his posture one of simple expectation. "You said powerful enemies. What kind of enemies require two beasts that size and a cloaking field?" Lyra looked into the blue flame of the lamp. She decided to offer a heavily edited truth, focusing on the core political conflict that made her hated, while omitting the details that would paint her as a grand, galaxy-shaking threat. "My people, the Loranian elves, once held dominion over several sectors. I was their matriarch. A rival species, the Cathar, orchestrated a political coup, painting me as a warmonger to the Galactic Council. They accused me of hoarding Forbidden's ancient technology, which I was protecting, not hoarding, and declared my entire line anathema. The Cathar want me dead and my children in their custody to erase my lineage entirely. I am the mother of 3, but also the last hope of a dying civilization. That is why I am the most hated." Brooke listened, his face impassive. He wasn't a statesman or a scientist. He was a rancher who understood predators and prey. "So you're hiding out on Earth's forgotten little cousin, hoping they don't notice," he summarized simply. He took a sip of his tea. "And what about those Forbidden's technologies? What did you bring with you that makes you worth hunting?" The question was direct, demanding. Lyra's gaze flickered to the faint shimmer of the plasma coolant on Kylian's blanket. She knew the medical truth would destroy any fragile peace. But she also realized that humanity's greatest strength lay not in technology, but in its surprising capacity for empathy and its primal need to protect the innocent. She had to appeal to the father in him. "I brought only my children and the dragons, but—" "There is a medical complication," Lyra admitted, the lie of omission finally breaking. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "My son, Kylian. The crash exposed him to plasma disruptor coolant. It is a slow poison to my species. He is weakening. I need an advanced medical intervention, a specific anti-corrosive compound. On any developed world, it would be a simple fix. Here, I fear, it is impossible." Brooke's blue eyes narrowed, not with anger or fear, but with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. He looked from Lyra to the small sleeping figure wrapped in a blanket. "Impossible isn't a word we use often on a ranch, Lyra. Hard, maybe. Dangerous, definitely. But not impossible. Tell me exactly what this compound does. What does it look like? What are the ingredients?" Lyra described the compound, a rare earth element suspension stabilized by a specific vibrational frequency. It was highly technical, highly specific. Brooke pulled out a rugged old datapad, a piece of technology Lyra would have dismissed as scrap, and began typing rapidly. Searching local science databases, obscure military journals, anything he could find. He wasn't a doctor, but he was a human who refused to accept helplessness after an hour of frantic searching. Brooke sighed, defeated. Nothing. Not a single lab on Xylos can synthesize that. It's too complex, too exotic. He looked up, his jaw set. "We need to leave the planet." Lyra stared at him, aghast. "Leave? Where?" "The moment we power up the escape pod, we alert the Cathar tracking network. It would be suicide for everyone." Brooke stood up, the humble rancher suddenly embodying a defiant, stubborn power. "Maybe for you. But I know a few things about moving things, Lyra. I have an old friend, a former colleague. She runs a research outpost near the fringe of the solar system. She's quiet, she's off-grid, And she specializes in exactly the kind of fringe material science you just described. I call in a favor, we use my old transport, the one I haven't flown in 10 years, and we get a temporary solution. We get that anti-corrosive. He leveled his gaze at her, the blue eyes burning with resolve. This was the legendary, unpredictable human factor. Lyra had heard about the capacity to stare down overwhelming odds and find a path forward, purely out of moral obligation. But you must trust me completely, Lyra, and you must tell the dragons they do exactly what I tell them. I'm not running from the universe for you, I'm doing it for a starving child. Now we move tonight. We have 4 hours before the moon sets. Lyra felt an overwhelming sense of relief and a terrifying, dizzying fear. The human was proposing a desperate escape that would expose them all to the dangers of space again. But he was also offering a lifeline, one born not of duty, but of raw, protective courage. She looked at her son, then back at the rancher who had just offered to risk his life, his home, and his peace for an alien mom he had met only hours ago. She nodded, her ancient heart swelling with a gratitude that transcended language. Tell me what to do, Brooke. He grinned, the worry lines around his eyes easing slightly. First, we move those overgrown lizards without spooking the neighbors.